Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Firm Podcast. I am your guest moderator again, Dr. Kristy Short. I head up content at Rightworks, and I am super pumped because today I get to talk to one of my colleagues, one of my most respected colleagues, one of the smartest women I've ever known. She is the director of product marketing for Rightworks. She has been in the cloud field for over a decade as a consultant, as an analyst. She is an expert on security. And of special note, she also holds a PhD and used to teach at the college level, PhD in American history. Please welcome my guest, Dr. Molly Boddy.
Kristy, thank you so much. Nice to be with another doctor. Thank you for calling all that out. And I love working with you, but this is special because we get to actually sit down, take a chunk of time, and dive deep into a topic. So thank you for having me. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes. Instead of in back-to-back meetings, we're always rushing out to do something else. Like we actually get to sit and have a conversation. And I'll be honest, I really am leaning toward just a conversation on American history because I love American history, but I don't know that that's what our listeners want. So we're going to talk about security today because
that sounds good. And we can have a follow-up.
Yeah. And you're going to do the bulk of the talking because you know way more about security than I do. So let's just start out with some background info. Can you just give a little bit of background about what you do here on the product team for Rightworks?
Sure. So our product, we have a product set for security. It really starts with our cloud, which is the center of keeping our customers, in this case, firms, secure, and also the businesses that firms serve, because we know that you have shared information with your clients. So you come into our cloud, and it is really our job to protect you. And so I work on our cloud product one space, but also the additional security that surrounds and extends the protection of our cloud. So I spend a lot of time each day with our product managers, figuring out what's next in terms of meeting the needs of the security threat landscape that firms are up against, and then also looking closely at compliance. So talking to customers a lot about what their needs are to keep up with the compliance requirements of running a firm and protecting customer data. And I know that we'll dive a little more deeply into that, Kristy, but I'm just so grateful that I get to help Rightworks, figure out what's on the roadmap, what comes next based on that feedback that we hear from firms.
Yeah, you made a really hot point in that answer, and it's that you talked about we need to look at security, but we also need to look at compliance. I think a lot of people don't see those things fusing together, but they really do. You need to be on top of both. So let's talk about threats. What are some of the biggest threats facing the accounting profession, firms, their clients right now?
So if you look across not just accounting, but the tech landscape broadly, and honestly, what all of us as individuals are facing too, like even in our personal lives, a lot of the recent threats that have hit the news cycle are really around sensitive data being published and then getting ownership back of that data. Now, obviously, for businesses, there's reputational risk attached to that. And to make this a little more firm specific, we know that firms have data that is gold. In fact, just last month, the IRS published a new bulletin reminding firms to follow the IRS Security 6, which we can dive into a little bit more. But I think the bigger point here is that the IRS and other governing bodies recognize that everything going on in the broader threat landscape is even more applicable to accounting firms because the type of data they hold is worth publishing for attackers.
So it's specifically important because for accounting firms, because you're looking at social security number, personally identifiable information or PII. So knowing that accounting firms are a pretty big target for hackers, I mean, how do you feel firms are assessing their security risk level, or are they, or do they need more help?
Well, I think, Kristy, I know we really want to dive in today around that exact question, but I guess, the overarching statement I lead in with is I actually think that the biggest threat and the biggest blocker to appropriately assessing the risk is time. And I know that's an interesting answer because it's not people and it's not security, which we're also going to talk about. But I just think that firms are, so strapped for talent at this point and just trying to get more into a day that they hear and see what's going on
Yeah.
but they just don't have the time to really stand back and at a higher level say day to day, am I enacting security the way that I should be, perhaps?
Or just keeping up with all of the different things you have to keep up with, including, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but a WISP. I mean, that's mandated now. Like, do they know what that is? Do they know how to implement that properly? But like, I do want to take a step back quickly, because what you said is so important. And I want people to know that we understand that internally in Rightworks. And it's that firms have so much to do. They've got to serve their clients. They have to ensure their staff have the tools they need. They have to keep up with security. They have to keep up with changing regulations in the tax code. There is always something going on, not to mention the rapid pace of technology, right? So the fact that they are so strapped for time, are you seeing that a lot of firms are outsourcing the security part of this to keep up? Are they having a champion on site? Like, how is that being handled? Because security is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it depends really on the size of the firm. So it's a great question, and maybe where they're at with their journey. I am seeing a lot of firms outsource security. And I think it's part of the reason why on the product team, I get to talk to so many firms, because they are interested in extending the protection that they have. But they also know from a cost perspective and a hiring perspective that security talent is really hard to come by, especially if you're on the smaller side. And that's part of the reason that they need easier options, essentially. And, it's something that really stuck with me. I try to go through the security news every single week and think about, all right, like, how could our firms be interpreting this? There's so many threats out there that are from legitimate software vendors. So I almost think that firms are in a position now where, like, they can bring best in breed technology in, but they still need a partner to be looking at this on a broader level.
Yeah. I mean, they not only need someone who understands security, they need someone that they can truly rely on, so that they have peace of mind that, okay, I know I'm covered over here. Like, total security is covered, from my staff being educated not to click on a phishing scam email to all of the devices are covered. I mean, we live in a virtual world. People are working in remote places. They're working from tablets. They're working from iPhones. They're working from their laptop. So there's so much to think about in the realm of security. Yeah, why wouldn't you outsource that? I mean, that's a 2 FTE job, to me anyway, for someone who doesn't totally understand all the levels of risk. And I'm assuming most firms feel the same way.
Yeah, I think so. And especially when you get, again, when you have smaller firms, they want to be spending time with their clients. And I think they know that they're not experts in everywhere that their data is going to travel, to the point that you made. And so I know as we have this conversation, one of the things that, I'd love to bring out for our firms is to really, get around this question of, well, how do I start thinking about all the places my data could potentially be at risk? Because I think, unless you know that at a very deep level, it becomes hard to actually solve for the problem or know, like, where you should put in appropriate measures.
Yeah. You said that firms aren't necessarily experts. And I would go further and say, and they really probably don't want to be. That's something that they would love to hand off to a trusted partner, right? And we're seeing that more and more. Not to get too far off base, I do want to get back to this idea of a firm threat level, as you define that. Yep. What does firm threat level mean to a firm?
So I think there's a couple of different angles, not to start out with complexity, but it is a complex question. So I want to sort of poke at this from a couple of different places. So I think, as you mentioned, client data is one part of it. So it's understanding, once you take in client data, where does it travel, either virtually or within, your physical space or your device, and understanding what those potential threat vectors look like. The other question that I would raise here is, when you're starting to introduce this idea of a firm threat level, compliance actually does play a part of it. Because if you're not in compliance, or if you're not then actioning on security steps out of your compliance documentation, such as a WISP, as you mentioned, Kristy, and we can unpack this more, you might not be solving for the threats that you've identified in your environment appropriately. So it's getting that compliance checked off, but then making sure that you actually action on the plan that you've put into place. And then I think the last thing is like, if something were to happen, right? How do you clean up from that? So when you're thinking about your risk level, it's not just, am I going to be attacked in the first place? I think you have to lead with the idea of, I also have a backup plan for my business and my clients if something were to take place.
Yeah, because obviously protecting client data is job number one, but you also mentioned reputation. I mean, one hack and your reputation can just be gone. We've seen this with big companies. We know that it happens. And to me, from a small firm perspective or a smaller firm perspective, it's even more devastating because of the cost, because of, really having to build those relationships back up, because we know firms, they're all about the client relationship. Like that is what it is all about to own a firm and to serve clients. It's about building that client relationship over years of time, and to wipe part of that out by being hacked. I mean, it's really something I think that preys very heavily on people's mind.
I 100% agree. And since a good portion of my day is spent talking to customers, one of the things that I have found really interesting, and you started to hint at this point earlier, firms don't want to be security experts, but they're trusted entities. And that just is a fact. So when their customers are handing off their data, they think this person or this firm has a better sense of how to protect the data than I would. So I don't necessarily need to ask them questions. Or maybe the small business or the medium-sized business that the firm is serving, they need hints and tips. And so they're actually going to the firm. So it's interesting that I've heard a couple instances of this talking to customers. They're like, I don't want to be a security expert. And yet my own clients are asking me these questions. So I need to be able to respond.
Right. I mean, and I'm not taking us off base too much here, but it's the same thing with something like marketing, right? Firms did not go to school to be security experts or to be marketers. They have to reach across the aisle to find experts to help them in those areas. And security is no different from that. And I think most firms would probably agree with that assessment, that we just want a reliable source to hand this off to. So we have peace of mind that our data is safe, our clients' data is safe, and our reputation is protected as well. So all great points. I do want to make that link from earlier where I talked about security and compliance, because people don't always see those things coming together. So what questions about compliance do you get around the overall firm threat level topic?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kristy. So I think with compliance, it's not a check the box. And so where I think firms might need to expand their thinking and where their risk level perhaps goes up a bit is they may be checking the box, right? They may be putting their WISP into place so that they can renew their PTIN, that preparer ID, tax ID number that they have.
Right.
However, the WISP, and I'm happy to unpack it more and sort of what I've seen our customers doing, the WISP gives you almost a status on how your security landscape looks and how you're responding to it. What blockers to threats have you put into place? And what are you going to do if something happens? And so it's really important that you've internalized that WISP and you're actually acting on the steps and not just using it as a document that you review and kind of stands there or sits there.
Or you just don't complete it because it's a mandate and then you set it on the shelf and you don't enact it and live by it every day. Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you for bringing that up. So let's do a few more deeper dive questions. Do you think that a lot of firms are aware of their actual threat level, and how accurate do you think their assessments are? Because I think this goes to how some firms maybe aren't in the security mindset and or maybe don't think the threat is as big as it is, but firms are a target, so they need to be aware of this stuff. So where do you put them at this point in terms of their own assessment?
So it depends, and I think they fall into a couple of camps. So I think if a firm has had an incident in the past, or they have friendly firms, other CPAs and accountants and tax preparers that they know have faced a threat, they are much more likely to be proactive and really hunt for partnership and best-in-class technology. So I have seen firms that are sort of closer to something happening have a much more accurate assessment of their future threat level, which I think is appropriate because once you're a target one time, you're a bigger target. Like you're on a list after that, because your data is out there.
Right.
Now, I also think that it depends on the secondary thing I'd say is if you're not in that category, it probably depends on how you're resourcing for security. If you have a relationship with an outside party that is extremely security focused, it's possible that you're being briefed on a regular basis about the threat landscape. And so you understand where you are at. And then I think there's a third category, Kristy. And a lot of our firms really, really do internalize how much risk they're at, but it's so overwhelming that I think they don't assess it in an ongoing sort of way. And they, as you said, they put it on the shelf and kind of say, okay, I have this one thing in place that should be enough to protect me. And so it's not as accurate as it could be.
Yeah, certainly with anything, frequency and consistency are important. Like you're always improving. A WISP, a compliance plan around security, it's not enough to write it once. You've got to come back and revisit that. I do want to talk about something. You keep mentioning these firms that you talk to, that you talk through this thing called firm threat level. I'm just mentioning this because I want to get it on tape so I don't forget. On tape, I sound like I'm 90 years old. I want to get it on the recording so I don't forget. But it would be really cool to bring you back and to have some firms on the show as well to talk through how they work through that assessment and what they're doing to proactively prevent hacks.
I would love that.
Let's do a series.
Like bring in a firm each time that's completed their WISP with us, because part of that WISP is actually going through what do you have in place to block threats, and also looking at FTC and IRS publications on requirements and best practices. And I would love to get directly from a firm for everybody to hear, hey, this really surprised me. I thought that I was further along than I was, because I think there are a lot of firms that feel that by looking at the WISP each year and taking it seriously, they've done enough. And I think it can be really unsettling when they see like, oh, actually the technology has moved a little bit further in proactive threat detection than I was maybe even aware of previously.
So I don't know if this is actually accurate or not, or what you're hearing, but is cost a blocker for being more proactive on the security front?
It absolutely is, because we know in any technology adoption and even any process adoption that firms are going to be cost sensitive. They have to control those costs. And so I think when you're looking either at a month-to-month service, maybe an annual cost of security, and it's a number that you haven't had before, that can be overwhelming to see. And the way that I try to talk through it when I'm sort of consulting with our firms, letting them try to weigh the risk versus benefit, is that the reputational cost that we've seen from both firms and small businesses who do have something happen is much higher than what you would pay on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're secure. And Kristy, we have people come to us after something happens and say, hey, what can you do to help us? And obviously you want to be in the reverse of that conversation.
Right. So it's a really good point. Like post-hack is so much more expensive than investing proactively upfront to prevent that from happening. And not just cost, because it'll shut your business down, but then your reputation on top of that could potentially lose clients. I mean, the cost beyond just getting back on track, getting all the communications out to alert clients, there's so many other levels that aren't tangible that people forget about.
Yeah, and the IRS is constantly putting out new reminders of, your responsibility to inform if a threat happens. And that, again, that's just not a position that you want to be in as an accounting or tax firm.
Stay on the other side, like be proactive. Like that's the lesson learned here is don't take security seriously after something's happened. Do it now so things don't happen. Perfect. Excellent. Thanks, teacher. That was the perfect way to recap that entire section. You and I both talk to a lot of firms. We've been in the profession for a while. We both know probably what they're thinking at this point in the podcast. And it's that this is a lot of great information, but hey, where can I start at assessing my firm? So can you just give like maybe a brief little action plan so that people can take away some actionable insights from this podcast to maybe start their own assessment?
Absolutely. So I think everybody's mind goes first to technology, and getting the right technology, perhaps the right partner, that's important and it's a must have. You have to check the box. But the next thing I would ask our firms to do is to actually look at their processes. So let's say that you have a completed WISP. That is awesome. But does everybody at your firm know the contents of that WISP, or at least the people who are close to client data or who have that PTIN to renew each year? We want to make sure that they're not just reviewing it annually, but that they're thinking through some of the items in the WISP. So as a for instance, I know our WISP talks about an incident response plan, and CISA, which is a federal agency that recommends an incident response plan for all types of small businesses. One of the things they say, Kristy, is that you should be doing regular tabletop exercises. So thinking through in a room as a group, like if something were to happen, how would that unfold for my firm? What would an incident look like? And then how would we act to mitigate that quickly? So that's one thing I'd say. Think about your processes, think about things like tabletop exercises, and putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who has had this happen. What does that plan look like? Don't wait until it happens.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and make your WISP actionable. Like if you have to do it anyway, which you do per the IRS, you should be taking something from that and then putting it to work for you.
Well, and I think some more good advice too is talking to other firms that either have been through a cyber hack or have a solid WISP in place and have a full plan around how to keep that fresh and how to keep their staff informed. I mean, so if you know someone in a community, you know somebody down the street, ask them as well, because peer-to-peer information is very helpful as well. Because I think a lot of firms are struggling with this. So why not ask each other for help and support and direction as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, the technology, the people, the process, thinking of it really holistically. And then, how elsewhere in our professional lives, we look at continuous improvement as an ideal that we're striving for. Like, how do we get better at this? And I would challenge our firms to think about that. Like, I am here today when it comes to security, and that's okay. But if I wanted to consult some of my small and medium business clients on this, if I wanted to, as you said, be a leader among my peers, what are the things that I might do as I talk to partners and talk to technology specialists? What might I do to get to that next level? And make a plan, make an action item so that you can look back a year from now and say, actually, we have firmed up how we manage client data.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's no way you can measure later if you don't know where you are today. It's just so important to do not only a thorough assessment, but an honest assessment of where you really stand. So I just want to go back and recap what you said. So when firms start thinking about putting a starter assessment plan together, they want to look at technology first, right? Like, what cloud application are you using? What tech are you using to help you avoid any sort of cybersecurity risk? You want to look at the people. Like you mentioned a lot of things like making it collaborative, doing those table talk discussions. And all of that to me also adds to a culture of security by keeping it front of mind. Also putting people through training, like for, this is a suspicious looking email. This is a phishing scam. Constant training throughout the year, as well as bringing people into your security plan is golden. Like that's going to further up, it's further going to fortify your firm against a hack. And then you mentioned processes. So again, the fabric of security in your firm, are you compliant with the WISP? Revisiting that to make sure that that is the strongest plan you can have in place, and learning from others as well. Like, did I recap that fairly well?
I think you recapped that great. And, the thing is, there's also rules around things like disposal. And so when you're going through a document like the WISP, it's pretty comprehensive. And so you do have to make sure that you're thinking across, as you said, all those three lanes: people, process, and technology. And, unfortunately, if you're missing part of it, you're missing a big part of it, because you are held to those standards now as a firm.
Yes, your clients trust you to take care of them in every way, and that includes keeping them secure. So yeah, that's a big thing. So I want to wrap this discussion with your insight, into the state of the profession right now. Given where you sit based on the firms that you talk to, based on the fact that you are entrenched in all things security every day of your work life, what's next for firms when it comes to security, do you think?
So I do think that where we started was around credible vendors having threats. And the cloud is where you want to go to be secure. But if you're managing the cloud on your own and you are thinking about, sort of going to one-off SaaS applications, that's actually a risk because we're seeing, like I said, well-known vendors' software being used to deliver malicious threats. So I think what's next for our firms is figuring out a comprehensive, multi-pronged solution where cloud security is central. They're not necessarily managing that cloud security themselves, but then they're putting other things in place and not just relying on cloud security. It's cloud security plus. It's an expansive way of thinking about the cloud. So in other industries, they talk about the idea of shadow IT, like are your employees going out to websites and accessing apps one-off? I think we got to bring that mindset into accounting a bit and say, let's get control over everything and then start to lock down the multiple vectors after we have real insight into what's being used.
Right. Yes. Excellent. Excellent advice. So I'm going to wrap with this. Are there any other reminders that you would want to offer firms in terms of assessing their security and the risk in the future?
Well, we're sitting here, in October. We're heading towards the end of the year. So I know I said it at this time last year when I was, out at some of the conferences, but AI continues to be a pain point for our firms to solve around. So if you do not have an AI policy in your WISP, if you have not considered AI usage, that now is the time to get that written down, documented, and sort of move forward with that because you're not going to avoid it. It's going to bring you efficiencies. So get your employees using it appropriately would be my final word of 25 advice here.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong. Our innovation team at Rightworks, they have an AI policy that's written with sample information inside. So they could get that from Rightworks as a place to start in terms of AI policy, correct?
Absolutely. And we'd be happy to talk to you about it too. You're going to go through, if you do a WISP with us, we go through a complete assessment. And if AI is a pain point for you, we're happy to discuss that and talk about how you might add that as part of your WISP process.
Wonderful. Awesome. So I can already see a series with this because there's 1,000 other things that I could ask you. I think I really want to bring some firms back to dig into this deeper and to get some peer-to-peer information out to firms. So in the meantime, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. Your expertise runs deep and I love it. And I know the listeners really appreciate it. So thank you.
Kristy, you were awesome. This was so much fun and I love unpacking these topics. So I really look forward to the series.
And we hope it was really helpful to all of the listeners. If you want to learn more on security, you can visit the website. Just, call Molly directly. I'll put her phone number at the end. She's cool with that. We can give me your cell phone, right? That's cool.
Yeah, call me at home. I'm all about it.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you took some action items out of this podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.